You can choose your actions or you can choose your consequences, but you can't choose both. It's one of the truths that we try to teach ourselves, try to teach our youth in particular as they get into youth group. I know we've, for the past 10 or 15 years, have tried to teach and instruct in that regard, that you can make choices, and choices that you have now that you may not have later on. Once we've chosen what we're going to do, our actions, then our actions begin to dictate the consequences we can receive. But if, on the other hand, you want a different result or a different consequence, then certain actions have to take place to accomplish that result. You'll notice in this traffic sign that it's giving you choices. And when you see a sign like that, it means you've got choices. Now, usually in traffic, you've got a very limited amount of time to make your decisions. Once you get to this point, though, you've got all kinds of choices. You can get in the left-hand lane, and you can either go straight, or you can turn left. You can sit in the center lane and go straight, or you can get in the right-hand lane and turn right. But note that you have choices. But the further down the road you go, the more limited your choices will become. During rush hour, you're probably committed from the moment you see this sign. But generally, you've got a little bit of wiggle room. You can get over, you can do things, unless you're in Alabama. In Alabama, you just stop and wait till traffic, and then you just go over. But today, we're going to be looking at the idea of consequences of choices in Proverbs chapter 15, verses 20 to 29. If you'll turn there, and you'll be able to follow along as we talk about various things. We have choices. We can choose what will ultimately lead to our death, or we can choose life. And that's the choice I think we need to make. The section here, verse 20, is an educational proverb. It begins with this educational proverb. We've already seen several of those in our study of the second collection of Solomon's Proverbs. That's where we're in chapter 10, verse 1, all the way through chapter 22, verse 16, is the second collection of Solomon's Proverbs. This is the collection that we believe Solomon himself put together. And he arranged these in certain ways. They're not as random as you might at first seem when you read them. There's a pattern to this. There's a design that evinces itself in the process of this, that there's a reason why he put certain proverbs together. And we've been noticing those as we go along, and it has added to our understanding of each individual proverb to see it in context and how it relates to the ones around there. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 1 says, "A wise son brings joy to his father, and a foolish son brings grief to his mother." That's an educational proverb, but I'd like to suggest to you that 15:20 explains 10:1. The reason a foolish son brings grief to his mother is because he despises his mother by rejecting her teaching. Look at chapter 15, verse 5. While you're in chapter 15, look back at what we looked at last week. "A fool spurns a parent's discipline, but whoever heeds correction shows prudence." What is the outcome that father and mother want for you? They want you to have joy. They want you to have joy in life. They want to be joyful in you, and they want you to enjoy your life. They want you to have a joyful life. Now, there's a thing on YouTube that I sometimes like to look at. It's called Fail Army. Here's an example of one of the things that is on there. Fail Army, it's a compilation of people that attempt to do and fail at most of the time. I mean, it's not as funny when they succeed. It's funnier when they fail at it. And somebody catches it on a video or a classic photograph, kind of like America's Funniest Home Video. If it's only funny when they mess up. I mean, it's one of those kind of things. Well, that's a fail. Well, what I'm calling this segment of our sermon today, I'm calling it Joy Fail. These people are joyful on their way to catastrophic failure. They're the happiest, joyfulest people you'd ever want to see, and they're just about to smack face plant in the sand. Look what it says in verse 21, the first part of 15, verse 21. "Folly brings joy to one who has no sense." These people have no sense. They're happy, thrilled to death to be on their way. They don't realize the danger they're in. Remember the last few weeks we talked about the pygmy lady who started taking her house apart? Began that process trying to win an argument with her husband, not realizing that unless something happens, unless we can figure out something, we're going to wind up being divorced as soon as I get this house disassembled. Remember Bonnie Parker, talking about Bonnie and Clyde? And we can look back and we can see this is going to end badly. You see, many times people start out making bad choices, and bad choices can lead to bad actions. Now, the choice is not necessarily an evil choice. It may not be sin, but you're making a bad choice. This is a bad choice for me. And then the choice leads you to some bad actions. Maybe not sinful actions, but you're doing something that's not smart. You're doing something that's dangerous. And eventually it can lead to wicked action, which is sin. And pretty soon you follow through those things and you're on the path to disaster. But you're thrilled to death. You're happy. You're joyful. You think you've got everything going, and you're just ready to smack faceplant into disaster. When it says here that one has no sense, I want you to understand that it's not talking about common sense. It's not that they don't have common sense. That's not what he's meaning there. We sometimes use it that way, but it is translating. When we say no sense, they're translating a Hebrew expression which says they lack heart. Remember, in Hebrew, the word heart has to do not with the organ that's pumping, but you at the very core of your being, the heart of who you are as a person, as an individual. We would say who you are deep down, who you really are. These people have a warped sense of who they are. They are at their core lacking. They have not learned and understood enough. They don't get what life is really about. The lights are on, but nobody's paying attention. They're not really following through. And they do not know what awaits them. Look at verse 22a for the other negative part of this. Their plans fail for lack of counsel. Their plans for life are going to fail. Why? Now listen, because they don't know enough to be successful. They don't know enough to be successful. Now, that's typical of young people, and there's no fault with that. I tried to find 4 pictures that look similar enough so I could illustrate same person at 4 different stages of life. Okay, that's what that's designed to be. When you're young, it's understandable that you have not lived long enough to have learned enough to gain experience enough to be able to handle the difficulties that are coming in life. So when we look at these pictures, and we look at these 4 pictures, when do you think this man, same man, remember, at all 4 stages of life, when do you think he would say he is ready to go to college? First picture? No, he's a little kid. He's not anywhere ready to go to college, and that's understandable. There's nothing wrong with that. When do you think he'd be ready to marry and start a family? First picture, second picture? How many think second picture? Third picture? Fourth picture? Teen, he might be ready to go to college, but he's not ready to get married yet. He hasn't lived enough. He doesn't have quite the experience he needs to be able to do that. At what point would you say this guy's ready to run for president of the United States? All of it, never? I was thinking, I don't even know this guy, and I might vote for him this go round. You know, we recognize that a guy, 25-year-old, is not qualified to be president of the United States. That's why you put an age requirement in the Constitution. The Founding Fathers recognized it takes a certain amount of life experience to be ready to run a nation. There are certain things that we learn as we move along. And if we move along and if we listen to our parents' teachings and we listen and we learn from others and we do things that are necessary, it's preparing us for further on down life. But not if we despise our parents' teaching. You see, if you say, well, my mom and dad are really stupid, they don't understand. Well, that translates to everybody their age. When I was growing up, don't trust anybody over 30 was a slogan. Well, that's kind of like saying, we like being stupid. We're happy this way. Leave us alone. We don't want to talk to anybody that's over 30 because they don't understand. You can't trust them. You don't understand their values. You don't know what they're saying. Turning people down leads to a lack of seeking out counsel. It develops a pattern, a habit of life that I'm not going to listen to anybody but me. I want to do what I think will make me happy. I'm joyful. I want to be joyful. I want to do the things that are going to make me happy, and I don't need anybody else's opinion. I don't need anybody else to tell me about life or what is necessary. I think about the original context of this passage in Proverbs. He was writing to his son Rehoboam. He taught all of these precepts to his son Rehoboam. He arranged them so Rehoboam could learn. Well, what happened with Rehoboam? Well, when you go back to, and we're not going to do that today, but when you go back to 1 Kings, you find that when Rehoboam became king, he didn't listen to the right counsel. He had wise counsel from men who were advisors to his father, but he chose to get some young men. By the way, young men, he was in his 40s at this time. So he had the young men, 40-something, gathered around him, but they were going to tell him what they thought, which was just the same thing as he thought. Beware of yes men. If you're important and powerful, it will tend to happen that around you are going to gather a bunch of people that think you know what you're doing. They're going to tell you what they think you want to hear because they're tied to you. They think, if I'm going up the corporate ladder or I'm going to be successful, I've got to tell this person what they want to hear, even if it's dumb. Even if they've suggested an idea, I think that's really crazy. This is the wrong way to do it. You need to be careful about gathering around yourself a bunch of people that think just exactly like you do and think that everything you do is right and agree with you. You need to look out and find people that don't think like you, that don't have the same life experiences you have. Maybe people that are older than you, people that are younger than you. You need to get the breadth of advisors. You need to get a wide range of people because that's what you need to get all opinions to evaluate things that are going on. Well, anyway, let's talk about going from joy fail, let's find, to joy find in verses 23 and 24. These people find real joy in life. Now, look at verse 20, verse 21, and verse 23 in your Bibles. Notice that the word joy occurs in all three of these verses. By the way, it's the same word for joy. It's translated the same way. A wise son brings joy to his father. He also brings joy to his mother. That's not there. But folly brings joy to one who has no sense. Same word for joy, but a different kind of joy. And then verse 23, a person finds joy in giving an apt reply, and how good and timely is the word. Now, this word translated joy denotes being glad at the very core of our being. It was used in the Bible when God described Aaron coming to meet Moses. Said when he comes to you, he's going to be glad to see. He's going to have joy at seeing this brother he thought he'd never see again. This brother that had to go away and has been gone for 40 years. Can you imagine the joy of seeing a brother that you had, maybe an older brother, and you hadn't seen for 40 years? How glad you would be to see him, particularly after you've traveled across the desert to see him. I mean, it's the idea of having real joy. In verse 30, it's also used to describe what takes place in your heart when you see somebody and you can tell by the look in their eye they're bringing you good news. Light in a messenger's eye brings joy to the heart. Just in his eyes, you can tell. I haven't heard it yet. But man, when he tells good news, gives health to the bones. We all want joy instead of grief and heartache. We all have that common goal, but we're not always approaching joy the right way or the same way. The greatest joy that Solomon had to offer his son is the same joy I have to offer you. It's described best by Nehemiah when he says in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 10, the joy of the Lord is our strength. If you want joy, real joy, you know the word, wonderful joy, let Jesus come into your heart. If you really want joy, you'll find that joy only in Jesus Christ. As he begins to make the changes in your heart, as you begin listening to the Lord and saying what the Bible says really is wise. What God wants from me really is what's really going to give me joy in life. It's the good news that you really want to hear. I hope that when we share the gospel with people that they can see the light in our eyes and know, man, whatever this person tells me, this has got to be good news. And when you receive that good news, it will change your life. I want to tell you something. Looking at the past week, the events, I realize a lot of those people in the nightclub, in fact, I would say, wager to say that all of them went there not thinking they were going to die that night. I don't know whether some of them were Christians or not. Don't have any idea, don't have any clue. And probably with, in my opinion, of the media, I probably won't find out that, whether they were or not. But I do want you to know that a life lived without God, without knowing God, is more than a waste. It's a tragedy. But a life lived with God and with the knowledge of God can never end in tragedy. You see, for the Christian, our life never ends when it ends. There's always the triumph that's coming. Even if you die in a tragic circumstance, it's not a tragedy. It's tragedy, but it's not the way your life ends. Your life doesn't end in tragedy. Your life always ends in triumph. It ends in resurrection or rapture, one of the two. You're going to be successful if you follow God. For the Christian, victory is always ahead in life. Verse 19 said, folly brings joy to one who has no sense, but whoever has understanding keeps a straight course. He's guiding himself by a straight course. The person who's doing that recognizes that I not only need to accept the advice and teaching of my Father, but I also need to seek out many advisors so that I can be successful. I think most dads in this room would admit that you don't know everything. At least to yourself, you'd admit it, that I don't really know everything. And sometimes I've had with my kids, they've asked things, and I've had to say, well, why don't you go ask so-and-so in the church? That's their field. If you go by a compass, compasses always have deviations, because our compasses on earth are based on not true north, they're based on magnetic north. And so depending on where you are, you've got to have a little reference card to determine what deviation I've got to adjust in my compass. So even a compass is not a totally reliable guide in precise circumstances, because it's going to lead you off, depending on where you are in the world, it's going to lead you off a little bit. So you have to have other things. If you're going to keep a straight course, many times you've got to have other advisors to help you make adjustments in your course so you can keep going the straight way. When we seek out vital advisors besides our fathers, and particularly besides ourselves, we are seeking to learn as much as you can. Listen, before you make a decision, try to learn as much about that subject as you can. Try to find out, try to ask as many people as you can, try to research, try to find out just as much about it as you can. Don't make the decision because this is what I want to do. Well, maybe you ought to find out whether this is the way to do this or not. Let's find out as much as I can. I think about starting a restaurant, I think, I don't have a clue. I mean, I know, good food, good service, but how do you charge? How do you deal? What are all I know from dealing with people in business, sometimes you got to think about, well, there are things you don't think about that you're going to have to pay and costs that are involved in that. And some of the costs are not stuff you would think would be there. For instance, if you're going into business, it's going to cost you in PR because some precious little soul from high school is going to come and want to sell you an ad to the annual. Did you put that ad in your business plan and the budget that I've got to buy an ad for this, or I've got to buy, there's certain things you're going to have to do because that's just how you do it in a community. They're expecting you get the reputation that you don't buy the ads, you turn down these ads, you don't do this, you don't sponsor this. Pretty soon people get to thinking, well, who is he? I'm not going to do any business with that. There's a lot of costs, a lot of things to think about in that regard. And knowing that, we need to seek out wise advisors. Verse 23 says, a person finds joy in giving an apt reply, and how good is a timely word. And I got to thinking about, not young people, I got to thinking about, old people older than me. And, it's important for us to learn wisdom so that we can give wise counsel. We need to be able to be so saturated in the wisdom of Proverbs that we not only can quote them, but we can quote them at the right time and apply it to the right situation when young people come and ask us for wisdom. That we can put it aptly, that's what I mean there, memorable words, aptly put and winsomely stated. In other words, we say it in such a way, we give such a reply, an apt reply, a timely word, that it is acceptable because of how we've said it, and we've said it at the right time, and we've encouraged someone. Many times as we get older, we tend to become grumpier, pessimistic. my goodness, what these young people are going to have to face. They can't make it. There's no way in the world they're going to make it in this world. I mean, it's just pitiful. They're stupid. And the world is stacked against them. I've actually had pastors say, I'm glad I'm finishing my career as a pastor rather than starting a career as a pastor in these terrible days. Boy, that's really encouraging, isn't it? You can kind of see the deer in a headlight look from some of the young pastors thinking, oh, man. Part of the reason God has left us here is to be able to speak God's wisdom in a way that attracts young people to that wisdom rather than puts them off from that wisdom. That we say it in such a way that we communicate to them, if you will follow the Lord, you'll be successful in life. Rather than, the negative. Well, it doesn't matter what you do because your life is going to be terrible. I mean, there's just no way. This country is gone. It's just, there's no way in the world you'll ever accomplish God's will. Besides, you probably won't do it. You're too hard-headed and stubborn and stupid. Let me tell you about when I was young. Things were good. It's like, okay, yeah. Note to self, don't ask this person again. We as older people need to be thinking about and learning Proverbs so that we are building our bank of wisdom to be able to give good, godly advice to young people when the time comes. It's possible for every person in this room to change the course of another person's life. If you're in the right place at the right time with the right word, you can change the entire course of their life, particularly for young people. You may be the one that encourages that young person to go into some talent or some field that you see they've got, and they have thought about, boy, if I could, but I'm probably no good at this. And you might be the very person that steers them in the direction this is God's life work for them. Don't mess that up, old people. Another thing that's really good for us to understand from this is that wise people are on the upward path. We get to live. We are on our way upward. We are improving. We are going to be successful. Not just that we're going to avoid an untimely death, but we're going to be successful in life. We need to recognize that, indeed, we cannot fail. You realize that as a child of God, you're heading for the rapture, the resurrection, the millennial kingdom, the eternal kingdom with God. There is no way your best days are behind you. Your best days are ahead. We need to recognize we can have a very positive view of life. Look down at verse 25, and let's think about the consequences we choose. Verse 25, the Lord tears down the house of the proud, but he sets the widow's boundary stones in place. Note the next one. The Lord detests the thoughts of the wicked, but gracious words are pure in his sight. And then the third one in this trilogy, the greedy bring ruin to their households, but the one who hates bribes will live. What's he talking about? He's talking about in all three of these verses, I think they're tied together around this concept of being greedy and taking the widow's house. Widows were defenseless in Israel. They had no man to sit at the gate, no man to stand there. And it says you'd move the boundary stone. What in the world is a boundary stone? First of all, I realized that the concept of stones in South Louisiana is a strange thing. But where I'm from, your property was marked off with rocks. In ancient times, they used rocks like this one that were carved and would have the name of the gods on it. And these were the surveyor's mark. These were the boundary mark. This is where the line, the field, this is your field. I'll mow over to this part, or I will harvest to this part, and then somebody else's field takes up there. And so there was a regular business of moving these stones, because when you move it, then you get to take somebody's place. And particularly when you move it on a widow, what's she going to do? She's not going to come out and beat you up. And so it was easy to take land, and now I've got a bigger field than I had, and I've stolen. They were actually doing that kind of thing. I thought maybe that was in the past. Clyde said when I was growing up, that was a regular hobby in Mississippi, to actually move the boundary stones. The proud, greedy people don't think graciously. They're not thinking, how can I help this woman and her children? But instead they think greedily, how can I take from this widow? It's no wonder the Lord detests their thoughts. You say, well, she'd get justice at the gates when she goes before the judges. Well, no, the judges had been bribed. I'm taking this and it's worth this. If you let this stone stand where I've moved it, it's always been there. I'll make it worth your while. And so many times the judges were corrupted and they were creating an unjust society. Unlike our societies where judges are always honest and not given to bribes and people would know. You see, if we create an unjust society, if we say, well, we're not going to give justice to the least of these, then one of these days it's going to be you needing justice. And justice goes to the highest bidder, or who's got the most in or the most bribery. You see, it's important for us, if we're going to live life, to do it God's way. Verse 28 says this, the heart of the righteous weighs its answers. You know, a person that's going to live forever weighs out his answers. You think carefully before you give an answer. You consider all the facts. You search and you say, what does God say about this? How does God say this person ought to deal with that problem, or I ought to deal with this problem? You even think about how is the best way to put this. You know, how can I say this? I'm thinking as an older person, how can I say this to this young person so they will understand what I'm telling them and see that this really is the best way? It's going to cost them in the short run, but long term, they're going to get a better gain out of this. It's going to change their life for the better. And you do all of this at the core of your being. The Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears. How in the world can God be far from the wicked? I mean, God's a spirit. He's everywhere. He's all around. How can he be far? Well, he's not talking literally being far, but he's talking about far in terms of hearing and answering your prayer. One of the things we all have to recognize is how utterly dependent we are upon God. You can make the best plans. You can lay things out the very best possible, and God can change it just with a little flick, just with a little, and all of a sudden everything in your life changes. We're dependent upon God. You can be in the worst situation possible, and God can bring you out of it. They could be absolutely humanly, even if everybody in the world got together and worked on your problem, they can't solve it, and God can change it in a moment, in an instant. The Bible says in the twinkling of an eye. God can change all of that, and you can go from being absolute failure to you are a success in life. Why? Because God heard your prayer, and God changed everything about life for you. Let me suggest three things as we close, three things to do, action items for us. Number one, be wise like mama. Listen to daddy. I see rolled eyes. Some of you are beginning to get that. Think about your own parents. Maybe your parents weren't saved. Did they teach you something that was wise? As you reflect today, think about what your parents taught you. Maybe you think, you know, there was something they always said to me, and that was really wisdom. They were trying to teach me how to really be successful in life, how to really find the right kind of joy in life. Think back on what they said. Hang on to that. Now, confirm it with other wise counselors. Go to the Word of God and see, is that really wisdom? Is that really God's wisdom? Check it out, but if it is, hang on to it. Don't be so anxious to throw away the wisdom your father gave you. Secondly, go for the joy of the Lord. Don't be satisfied with anything short of God's joy in your life. The world's going to offer you a whole lot of things that provide temporary relief, temporary distraction that you're going to think are joyful. You're going to be joyful on your way to disaster, on your way to a great big old face plant. But recognize that there's a joy from God that's better. Don't settle for the worldly joy. Go for the joy of the Lord. And then finally, determine to do what's right. Determine that you're going to keep the straight course. You're going to do what's right. A lot of people do not choose righteousness, but instead give in to wickedness. They will live a life of pride, greed, wickedness, and death. We've talked about it before. They've chosen a death style. What I really want to encourage you today, choose life.